is a topic that has been used very often these days to really look at the challenges and the issues behind the relationship between human beings and nature. Why we talk about sustainable development? Because there is a concern in humanity that somehow we are destroying more than we are actually saving. And those savings mean something. Wildlife means something for us. Trees mean something for us. You know, air, clean air means something for us. Clean water means something to us. So the average person on the street feels that this debate on sustainable development is about how to deal with nature. Now, the term is not new, however. For a long time there has been a debate on how to sustain life in this planet, how to sustain economic benefits over time, how to sustain communities. So this term has evolved to be very, very much related to the environment. But essentially, whatever you define and however you define sustainable development, there are certain characteristics of this debate that are important. The first one has to do with interdependence, human interdependence, interdependence between us and nature, and so on and so forth. Is the inability to sense that interdependence. So when we are not sensitive to that interdependence, we don't mind how we affect humans and how we affect the environment. The second dimension of sustainable development is on the long-term impact of our actions today. You know, if we cut the Amazon forest now, how would the planet survive in the future? If there are no more elephants left, you know, what will happen many, many years from now? We don't have the information really. We have some, but not all the information to know about this impact. So we need to be cautious about how we deal with the planet, even if we need to consume, in inverted commas, you know, this natural environment. So these are called intertemporal choices. The other preoccupation of sustainable development is about what do we leave for future generations? You know, are we just to satisfy our needs and sacrifice the next generation? It's a big, big debate because it's not only an economic debate because resources have to be allocated to get where we want to go, but also it has to do with ethics and morals. I mean, what is the right of a future generation? Do they have rights? They are not here, but do they have rights? The next element of this debate is whether sustainable development is related to a spatial impact. You know, the upstream user of a watershed, a river, water, affecting, you know, all the other users downstream until we get to the ocean. Here we have rights and responsibilities, responsibilities and rights, and the question is, who should pay for the pollution of that water, or whether there should be pollution in the first place, and how to use technology, human wisdom, social organizations, the state, the private sector, everyone to make sure that even the last user of that unit of water essentially has that clean water. So sustainability is about people, it's about nature, it's about interdependence, about interaction. Now, definitions are many. One definition is a sustainable society is one that can satisfy its needs now without sacrificing the needs of future generations. My own personal definition had a lot to do with economics because I'm an economist, and basically I'm looking at the space in which sustainable development fits within traditional concepts of economic growth and capital accumulation, development and equity and distribution, and then sustainable development, where do they fit? So growth for me is the speed and the size that economy takes to make capital grow. Physical capital, financial capital, human capital, and so on. Development is that what do we do once the economy has grown? You know, who gets the benefit from that growth? Sustainable development is, can we maintain that equilibrium, that balance among all these forms of capital? Finally, I would say that sustainable development is a way of life. Sustainable development is a vision. Sustainable development is a collection of values. Sustainable development is an inner experience. If you don't know what sustainability is inside your bones, It's very difficult that you relate to it outside your bounds. So if you want to live in a sustainable society, you need to have a consciousness, a coherence, an awareness that in itself recognizes sustainability. Most people in the international space, in the international dialogue, use the term development. Somehow development means different things for different people. But development as a lexicon means that you are in a state now X and you are going to a state Y. And development is the attention on how we move from X to Y, who moves from X to Y, how this move is being made, who benefits from that move, who loses from that move, etc., etc. So for a long time, economic and social development means material and social advancement. But actually, it's very difficult for a society to just leave that word development at that stage of economic and social, because there are cultural, there are ethical, there are spiritual, there are anthropological, ecological, you name it, elements that are involved in moving from X to Y. So many people have measured this advancement, and the traditional measure of development is gross national product, which is a very material measurement. And people are actually not very content with that type of measurement, and economists have debated very much whether gross national product actually measure development. It's like your child development is not only how high or how big it is, it's about something else. And for example, countries like Bhutan, have moved from gross national product to gross national happiness. What makes people happy? This concept is not touchy-feely. Actually, in the United States and in many countries of the world, we are measuring which is the best city. How do you classify the best state? And this is not just a city in terms of its material existence, but your own personal. How do you feel about security, safety? How do you feel about availability of services? How do you feel about crowdiness or not crowdiness? How do you feel about pollution or not pollution? So development is a concept that embodies that transformational space between X and Y. How to measure it, as I said before, is not that easy. But now more and more people are measuring development by non-material means, And so we have these social indicators, these human indicators that people are bringing about, opportunity, security, etc. Empowerment, a city can empower you or reduce you to nothing. They can give you opportunities or reduce to nothing. So this process is a very cumbersome process. The other part of development is who actually benefits from moving from X to Y. And this is the whole issue of equity, and we know that in many countries, only a few people maintain possession of the material benefit of development. And the possession of this material benefit translates many times into a lesser quality of life for the rest of the people. So we have poverty, misery, marginalization, etc., etc. We see it through shanty towns, we see it through social instability, through violence in the city, and so on, which are manifestations that this move from X to Y is only being appropriated by very few. So development is about equity. Development is about who actually benefits from, this economic growth that people talk too much about it. We also can put a face on development. Where are children from X to Y? Where are women from X to Y? Where are the indigenous people from X to Y? Where are minorities from X to Y? Where is the disabled from X to Y? So development is a very comprehensive debate about where society is going and how it's going to get there. In development, there are many terms that we use to express somehow that something is lacking. One of these terms is capacity building. Somehow we are saying there is no capacity. Someone has to build the capacity or from zero or from where it is. But the capacity for what? Why do we need capacity? It means that somehow someone has violated the capacity, or has assumed that there is capacity. For example, I bring money to a society and people need to respond to in many different ways. I bring tractors to agriculture and people need to know how to use these tractors. I bring computers to rural areas of Africa or Latin America, and we need to know what people are going to do with these computers. So capacity building means to create the enabling environment that is capable to make the maximum use of the resources available to that society. So the fundamental question is who has violated this capacity and how this capacity actually is violated. One way to violate this capacity is to provide people with technology they have never seen, they have never used, and so in the end, they destroy the tractors because they don't know how the tractors function. It's too far from their understanding of how agriculture should be done. Or these computers, get not to be used to the maximum extent because people actually have not been trained how to use computers. So why capacity is violated? The number one issue is that capacity building or capacity is not an endogenous variable in decision making. Because if we would have, in the first place, before we make the final decision, brought this variable capacity as we bring the variable money or bring the variable time or whatever, if we do not bring capacity as part of the decision-making process, most probably you will violate it. A derived impact of this is to assume that you go first for one set of variables and leave capacity for the end. We will deal with that later. Let's bring money to people, but then people never pay the credit back. People never understood what this money was for. Tractors, yes, but there is no capacity to provide these tractors with spare parts. We will take care of it later on. We have these vehicles, but there is no gasoline in that area. So the problem we have is that decision making in development often assumes capacity as an exogenous variable, as a variable outside the initial decision making process. So these decisions about development violate the capacity, and sometimes people make a business out of this violation. You destroy tractors, you sell more tractors. You create more pollution, you have pollution abatement projects. You have no education, so you do education projects. So sometimes, not consciously, but sometimes it is conscious, to create the breakdown in institutions, in organizations, in human resource development, to create more business in the future. This is the wrong way to deal with development. So capacity building means to create more space to contain a decision in development. So how do I contain these tractors so they don't become incoherent, imbalanced with my life, with my form of relating to agriculture? How do I contain computers so that I can grow faster, I can do better things and more effectively than otherwise? This containing capacity, this capacity to contain decisions needs to be part and parcel of that decision, of an initial decision. So capacity building in the jargon of today, in the jargon of the street, is better organizations, training, understanding new technology, getting people into courses, and that to me is the easiest part of the debate on capacity building. The difficult part is how to create at the national level organizations, incentive structures, that are coherent with the push that we are trying to give to that particular society. Therefore, the human factor must be at the center of capacity building. Tractors are not it. Technology is not it. Human beings are it. And this is where we need to think about what type of capacity building will give people in the future before we break down their institutions by a large project, by an incoherent project, an incoherent decision. And I would say that this needs to change, because it's not just classroom education, it's not just training by consultant, it is also experiential, relationship with their social environment, their anthropological environment, their political environment, and their organizational environment. Development is failing because of the lack of capacity. In a sense, that phrase means that development was the wrong type of development in the first place. If you have a little child and you tell this 2-year-old to drink 5 liters of water, basically you are destroying it. Don't blame the kid. Blame the decision to make the kid to drink 5 liters of water. So if you want this little kid to drink 5 liters of water, you need to prepare its space to contain these 5 liters of water. If you want the little child, at 2 years of age, to manage an electric train of the size of this room, basically it's impossible. No, there is no capacity. Yeah, but how do you blame this little kid? The same thing with our society. Our society grows in a particular pace, and this pace needs to be respected. It's established in a group of organizations. We need to understand the capacity of those organizations. It is in a particular physical space. We need to know whether the environment can contain this. So capacity building is about containment. To me, to talk about indigenous people, it's a very difficult topic, because I have a high respect for the elder. I have a very high respect for our ancestors, those who were here and those who are here for a long, long time in this planet. And what is most tragic is that many people in society feel that these people are useless, that they don't represent anything, that they are part of the past, that this is a decoration somewhere in the system, that they are very nice, but they leave it at the word nice. I have received tremendous knowledge from the elders of different indigenous populations. And I have realized that even my PhD is not good enough to level with their own wisdom. I remember one time one elder asked me, how do you make investment decisions? So in my technocratic way, yes, we do benefit cost analysis, we do this, we calculate that, and so on. He said, but are you worried about 7 generations from now? And I stopped. I understood that my view was very short term, that my toolkit, the toolkit that we receive in the university and in development practice, was not good enough to deal with this 7 generational impact vision. Do you really put a face on what you do? Do you know women, children, grandparents? Where do they fit into this? Why you have nature there and you are here? Why do you think that nature is not as intelligent as you are? So I began to realize that these people have been in this planet for thousands of years. I've been only here for a few, years. And I have the ego to try to teach them, because I have a PhD, why I need to listen and learn their wisdom to understand what's happening in the planet. Now, many people think that indigenous people are part of the past, so they cannot offer anything for the future. And I think, quantum physics, new economic thinking, new anthropological thinking is coming, in a sense, these new things, these new discoveries are coming to confirm the vision of indigenous people for the last, 20 centuries. So it's interesting how we cut our tail, in the end, trying to find out something, trying to learn something, trying to reach some discovery, some new idea. And this idea was in the planet for centuries. So we need to be more open to indigenous knowledge and indigenous wisdom. In addition to their rights, there are human rights that protect them in terms of how do they interact with the rest of society. How do they survive in a society that disrespects their own existence? marginalize them, and so on. So they're at crossroads because they are poor people in general, because we have taken away the resources that were theirs. They have accepted in some ways our rules of the game when they know that our rules of the game are more destructive than constructive. They have accepted, that we actually do these things, development, sustainable development, and so on, a la Western style, when they know that actually in the longer term, this type of sustainable development, this type of understanding is not going to get humanity where it needs to go. And we see it through war, conflict, destruction of the environment, the disappearance and the depletion of wildlife. So we are witnessing ourselves the failures of our own model. The debate on indigenous people and sustainable development comes also from a very practical angle, which is that indigenous people live in the frontiers of development, in the regions where there's still the subsoil is rich with minerals and oil. They live in areas where the forest has been untouched, and you have the trees and the bushes and the plants and the medicine, and then the pharmaceutical industry and medicine and many other branches of life are saying, well, we need different materials to deal with the diseases that we have ourselves created through economics and development. So indigenous people are sitting on a gold mine of knowledge, on a gold mine of natural resources, and there is this tremendous problem on how we balance, the Western mode of economic growth and development with this slower, less consuming, less destructive, more sustainable way of life. And people see that as going backward. I personally see us going forward. And my problem is that it's very difficult to go forward to reach this ancient basic knowledge because my mind is already distorted away from it. So why we discuss indigenous people in sustainability? Because they hold the key to the future of our sustainable civilization. The destruction of indigenous people is like burning the library before we read the books. So languages are being gone, knowledge is gone, disappearing, pristine areas are disappearing, and I think we better stop for a moment and give them the room, the respect, so that we can find truly sustainable development instrument and the sustainable development path that society needs at this very moment. Development is not an abstract thing. Sustainable development is not an abstract thing. It's a very practical thing that has a face in it. Has the face of the child, the body of the old man, the nurturing capacity of women, and so on. And the more we make sustainable development and development something very abstract, it's just for some group to gain and millions to lose. In this context, I like to say that women are the central pillar of sustainable development. If we want sustainable development societies, we need to start sustainability from within ourselves. Women are the carriers, the instruments, the protectors of life. And so they are giving life to children that become the leaders of the future. And if we don't respect women, if we don't respect feminine energy, if we don't understand the role of women in our society, this is the best way to go into the cliff of an unsustainable society. It is appalling that in the year 2010, we are discussing the rights of women. So when I see these meetings on the streets about equal rights, my heart really goes ballistic because this should not be a topic. This should be a reality. Nobody should question that women should have equal rights. The women in a shanty town in Rio de Janeiro, as well as the richest CEOs, in the center of São Paulo, they are two very important pillars of our society. So today, when we look at poverty in the world, we find that more than 50% of the poor people in the world are women and children. And this is a bad news. When we talk about who is not allowed to go to school, are girls in the world. So where we are actually having this process of double punishment, we are not enabling women to access to education, access to wealth, access to stability, access to empowerment, access to opportunity. And on the other hand, we expect that the fruits of women in those conditions will create sustainable development. This is not possible. This is a contradiction. So the first step in human development, the first step in development, the first step in sustainable development is to provide the conditions so women have the right space in our societies. I would say the most prominent space in our society. This is not only about sustainable development, it's about world peace. I have said internationally that the moment Israeli women and Palestinian women are around the table as negotiators of Middle East peace, that there will be peace in 15 days. And so women have an inclusive way to deal with life, have a diverse way to deal with life, have a nurturing attitude towards life, because that's what their main asset is. While the rest of us, we are looking for exclusion, competition, competitiveness, comparative advantage. All are values that are very individualistic and exclusionary in nature. When I walk the Andes, and I see these women with the child in the back, with the wood on the head, and with the bags on the side, carrying clothing and food and so on. When I see the women in my region of Ningwe, head down, shoveling the land and cleaning the grapes and washing the olives and so on, you find out that women in the marketplace are also a very fundamental piece in our society. But that child is still in the back, and they have to take care of it. I did a study in India many years ago, so this might have changed, where the salaries of women are many times less than the salary of men for the same job. And this is not India, sorry. This is almost everywhere in the world. And this is a sad story. Societies are not trying to help, are not supporting family. And so we have been forced by the way the capitalist system is working today, not only have the men working, but women and children working. And so now there is a total incoherence of how we're going to get to sustainable development. A society will only be sustainable when the life of women are sustainable. Not as a handout, as an empowered form of life, where we don't have these huge rallies of success because there is one president in Chile, Mrs. Bachelet, who was a woman, where we need to go to the street and enjoy that 50% of the leaders are women. Now we are pushing. What do I mean pushing? This should be a natural process. In Congress, in the Senate, in the White House, in our White House in Chile, in La Moneda, we should all be very happy that women have equal opportunities to become president and become leaders. But this needs to start at the center. And the center is that feminine energy has been displaced by masculine energy in development. Technology is now very masculine. It's productivity, productivity, productivity instead of love, compassion, caring, sharing, and solidarity. And I think there will be no future for humanity if we don't take care of the future of women. Anyone on the streets, what type of society would you like to have? Basically, people will say, we want a sustainable society. That whatever we do is not going to harm anyone. That whatever we do is not going to constrain our options for the future. So sustainability is essentially a way of life, a way to maintain ourselves in interaction with each other and with nature and with the spirit in a way that we are not going to sacrifice ourselves by the wrong action today, a few days, a few months, a few years into the future. Sustainability also is about equity. Equity in the sense who is to bear the benefit or who is going to bear the costs, of actions, of different actions in this continuum. So the fundamental question is, what is the instrument that will enable us to fulfill those beautiful objectives around sustainable development? Is the market going to get us there? It's just by buying and selling, manifesting ourselves in the marketplace, in the shopping centers, in the supermarkets, in the market yards. We manifest ourselves through the market, through purchasing power, through buying things, selling things. Is this enough to give the signals to the overall society that we are getting where we want to go? The only way to answer this is by empirical evidence, and what people feel today is that maybe not. Maybe the market is not actually giving the enabling environment for us to be happier, to be better off, to be content, to be, peacefully interacting with one another. So the question for society is, what is the other instrument? The other instrument that was given to us, the state knows, the government knows what to do. The rules of the collective might get us where we want to go, because individual action might be very selfish, maybe very centric, and therefore what I do personally might not accumulate, might not contribute to the collective welfare of society. So there have been many propositions. The question that I am asking today is whether this proposition can exist without rights and responsibilities. Can we live in a society with no rights? In other words, I can do whatever I want type of society. Would that work with 7 billion people in the planet? Would that work with the amount of environmental destruction that is taking place? Would that work with the large number of cities with 20, 50 million people? Would it work with globalization where there are no more borders? So can we see ourselves in societies where we cannot relate except like a jungle? It's not possible. So rights are an essential ingredient, and where do these rights come from? From some vision of what is right, in inverted commas, to a given society. I cannot go and punch you on the face. You have rights to defend yourself. You have rights not to be, violently attacked, and so on and so forth. But also we have responsibilities. What is my responsibility with my child? What is my responsibility with my garden? What is the responsibility with my house? What is the responsibility with my community? What is the responsibility with my country? And last but not least, what is my responsibility with the rest of the world? Can I just be me and let the rest of the world sink into their poverty and misery? Can I be me and let the rest of the world live at a half level of human welfare? So human rights are essentially a code of ethics. Human rights are a collection of values. Human rights are a way of interacting in which there is a consensus that we should have those values, that should interact that way, and we should move into that direction. For example, freedom is a right. Should we be free or not? The non-discrimination. Justice. Can we live in societies with no justice? I hit you, but then there is no one that can help you to defend yourself. So rights are a natural ingredient of the right vision for society. They are not just these legal things that they have become that because people are not respecting rights. But the natural existence of rights is in response to the social establishment, social nature of our human interaction. So we have human rights, we have rights in general, property rights, we have all sorts of rights in the society. And the more the market fails, the more you fail in your behavior, the more rights are going to come on the top of you. Whether societies have the capacity to manage those rights, to implement those rights, to fulfill those rights, is the next question. In the last few months, the event of 33 miners in Chile being trapped inside the mine. Of course, the most positive outcome has been the capacity of the Chilean society to mobilize itself in ways that we have never done before and get the miners out of the ground. We have never really been, at least in my many years of existence, been involved actually in something so refined, so precise, so dangerous, and at the same time so publicly known, because there was press from all over the world to witness, this particular operation. We can now tell the positive story. Of course, the alternative scenario could have been a disaster scenario where, for some reason, we lose all of them. But this success needs to provoke a major think piece, a major social dialogue in my nation and in many nations of the world. The fundamental question is whether this should have happened in the first place. Or are there more people in the labor force that are subject to a potential disaster like this one because of no safety, no management of safety, and no interest on safety? And I think this is very important to come out with a positive feeling about the outcome of the miners and use that positive feeling to reflect on what's happening in the workplace. It is interesting to know that the oldest United Nations organization in the world is the International Labour Office. In 1912, I might be wrong, but is the oldest, is the eldest brother or sister of all the other organizations. And despite of the fantastic work that organization has done over the history of humanity, we're still present with these problems in the industry, in the mining, actually in almost every sector of the economy. So my first question is, how would a society organize itself, not just that industry, that mine, to avoid major disasters in the future? Is this part of the right vision of our society, a safe society? Or is part of our right vision just produce and trade and sacrifice the rest? This is not a philosophical question. This is a very practical question, because you know that a large percentage of the miners went back to mines to work on mines that are also unsafe. Shall we be in societies where the poverty of the worker is such that is obliged to work, on the most unsafe condition, no matter what, because he or she has to eat? The people who are sewing, cloth in many, many countries in Asia, those little kids who are making soccer balls or weaving carpets, is this necessary in 2010? And how to avoid this situation? Where is the incentive structure for safety? Where is a good proposition that is understood and disseminated, and where there is a communication strategy around the world that is easy to digest, with simple rules, with simple teachings, so that people understand that we have the capacity in this day and age to produce more in a nice working environment? I think I'd wrestled with this since the miners were down the ground. Every day, this has been a topic a long time in my life, but very intensively in the last few weeks, last months. The other transcendental question, actually, that was asked many times is about life. What is the value of life? Is the value of life of a miner, a poor guy, equally high of a rich person in my society, of a rich kids from a rich family? Or these miners are to be subject to this no matter what? Look, this is a cost of development. You know, some people have to die. This is the cost of growing faster, so we need to have unsafe industries. This is at the essence of politics, is at the essence of economics, is at the essence of social policy. You know, can we operate in a world which implicitly we're saying the life of a miner is not worth too much? Okay, we got 50% of them out and that is a success? Or this should not have happened in the first place? The final point here is that we have laws, rules, and regulations on paper. Like we have the right of the child, you know, the right to water and so on. Why in our societies we are not willing to enforce them once we agree that this should be the rule of the game? Can you imagine playing tennis without rules? Nobody knows when the ball is out, without referees, you know, without ways in which society knows that we are advancing toward winning the match. And winning the match for us is to have a happy, holy, and healthy society. So this issue of the miners has opened up very profound ethical, moral, and spiritual questions. This is not just we macho people, you know, that we won the war and we got them out and now this is it, the case is closed. No. This case is just open to look at the morals, the spiritual, and the humanistic dimensions of development in our society. And this should never happen. But what does it mean should never happen? Many industries will have to invest more. Many government has to invest more. You know, we have to have justice and a justice system that works before the accident happened and not after. So to find this corporation guilty is the easy part. The difficult part is to find justice systems that actually are part of the incentive structure to be safe, to be happy, holy, and healthy. Many of the areas of the world that are suffering from environmental disruption are essentially because the economic, agricultural, and social system has gone into a direction that is more depleting the natural resource base than actually maintaining and conserving the natural resource base. Some people identify this process of non-sustainability with poverty or with a small-scale agriculture, small-scale enterprising. Now, people will say, okay, to jump from this state to a next state, what do we need? And many of them think financing. You know, we need money. These people are poor, they don't have the resources, the means to cultivate the land in this way, because cultivating it this way means different types of machinery, different types of equipment, and they don't have the money to purchase this thing. So for a long time, and the most brilliant one has been Mohammed Yunus, you know, who created the Grameen Bank and said, you know, money should not only flow to rich people, large projects, you know, large-scale things. How do we create the conditions to mobilize money to the little enterprise, to the small farmers, the person who even doesn't have property rights over the land but needs to survive? And he found that the central theme was not money per se, but was trust. That the essence of money being reproduced over time, because you give them money, the money needs to be paid back. You know, credit means that you give something to get back later on. Otherwise, it's just a handout. But when we talk about micro credit, we are talking about this little money, $10, $50, $100, depends on which scale are you talking about. If you talk about small scale enterprises and microfinance of them, then we're talking about larger amounts, but it's still very small compared to the multinational corporations' need for financing and the credit system need for financing. But the essence at that level that I'm talking about, the little enterprise, of success of microfinance was not money per se, was the productivity of that money. What did they do with the money and how the money created more? And secondly, trust. So Mohammed Yunus never gave money to one person. He gave the responsibility of managing that money to a minimum of 4 people, and mostly women, that they had a vision of the efficiency of money different from men in that particular society of Bangladesh. So microfinance became very important. Today, microfinance is more than just this little person. It's the creation of financial capacity in sectors that have been marginalized because the scale of operation is rather small. Why is this? Because the cost of credit, the cost of managing a loan is high and similar actually to large credit. So the loan officers have more incentive to pile large amount of money out of the bank because the amount of time and resources you use to really get that credit going is more or less the same as this smaller credit. But then people couple this issue of finance needs with employment, and they found out that the large sector is not creating much employment. So they said, okay, where is employment being created? In the small print shop, in this small glass making factory, in this pottery, and so on. So they say, well, let's move a little bit with the view to create more employment. Let's move financial resources to this sector. Now, I would say that in the longer term, the issue again is not money. The issue is capacity to enhance the productivity of these financial resources. Because if you only create debt for the sake of debt, actually you will kill that small scale industry. You will destroy that sector that creates employment. So you have to be very careful about what you do with this microcredit in reality. The other major issue of microcredit is that microcredit cannot be thought as different from credit. You cannot have a system of microcredit that is different in terms of its incentive structure, interest rates, time of repayment, and so on, with the large credit system, because money is the same. $1 is $1. So the dollar will go where the productivity is higher or where the distortion is higher. So if the credit system of a country is distorted, most probably that will kill the microcredit system in the longer term, because money is money. Here is the dollar. Doesn't matter where the dollar comes from. What is important is where the productivity of the dollar is being created. And if it's created somewhere else because of distortion, speculation, and these financial markets that are not creating any material good, but they're creating just more money, possibly the microcredit does not have life in the long term. It will have life as long as development practitioners, as international organizations, as donors are willing to give it. But that should be a lesson already learned from development. For many, many, many years, people have given money, never returned back the money, but the beneficiaries were left with the debt. And so instead of creating wealth, you have created more poverty than before. So let's not use microcredit to destroy the middle and small scale enterprises in the longer term, or make them a subject of debt. Because if that is the business, to have more debt out so you can make more money, then in the longer term, our societies have only to lose and nothing to gain. From Chile, therefore I am from Latin America. We in Latin America are the richest continent in terms of biodiversity and many other resources. So a big question is being posed these days as to what we do with these resources. What is sustainable development in Latin America? What is the state of sustainability in Latin America? And here I think we need to put a question mark or a yellow light, because we are seeing, how our resources are actually being diminished day by day by multinational corporations that go there and get these big contracts on minerals and on oil and on forest and so on. They're diminished rapidly by globalization, by the incentive that globalization gives to cut down trees and to, get the land into more and more intensive agriculture with more pesticides and fertilizer. So the micronutrients of our soils don't have much to offer. So the lettuce look very nice, the onions look very nice, but you are not eating anything that has substance for your human body, in addition to be contaminated by these pesticides and these fertilizers. Now, Latin America in terms of sustainable development can be divided in several different compartments. First, we have the indigenous Latin America, the Bolivia, the Ecuador, the northern part of Chile, part of Colombia, all the Andes. Sustainability there is a way of life. And I think we need to make sure that these societies can live sustainably over the longer term. Their challenges are poverty, their challenges are integration with the rest of society. What do we do with the children of these indigenous people? Maybe they don't want to go back to agriculture. They are abandoning the mountains to come to the cities, for a better life, in inverted commas. The loss of values and belief system, the loss of the language, the loss of culture, etc., etc. Sustainability is not only economic sustainability, not only environmental sustainability, but cultural sustainability, human sustainability, social sustainability. Their social organizations are also failing because they're being penetrated by another form of governance, another form of relating to the rest of the system. Then you have the Latin America that is highly advanced agriculture. How do we sustain the vineyards and the fruits and the vegetables that are becoming a very central part, flowers, very central part of our export-driven model of economic growth. Here, I think there are two major variables. One is climate change, how that is going to change the ability of the land and water to provide the final product. And the other one has to do with intensive agriculture in areas where the land is very fragile or exhausted. There is no more for the land to offer. So maybe we're producing on the land, but maybe this is like producing in a laboratory. But that is a very profitable market, so the incentive structure is there to keep doing it. Then there is a third space in the sustainability debate, which is the global public goods. Our oceans, our forests, our wildlife, our biodiversity, to name a few. And here we are the center stage in the international debate on sustainable development, because what is the role of the Amazon? What is the role of all these little frogs and little snakes and animals and so on for the future of medicine, for the future of health, for the future of humanity? Shall we preserve this? Not long ago, there was a little frog found in a highway between Ecuador and Colombia. And they found that the liquid that this little frog throws when you try to touch it is better than morphine in terms of curing, pain, and no side effect. So some laboratories found that out from the indigenous peoples, that type of medicine, and they're using it. I understand that they're using it in the United States and in Europe. So biodiversity, it's not something abstract, it's something that is at the foundation of life. The fourth space on sustainability in Latin America is the city. What are we doing in the cities? Are these cities a real good place to live, What happens to air pollution? Mexico City, Santiago, Chile, Sao Paulo, Quito, La Paz, These are cities that are becoming less and less attractive to many people. They might be attractive to business, but people are saying, well, what am I gaining with pollution? What am I gaining with congestion? What am I gaining with the low quality in the provision of public services? So sometimes, for example, to get gas, water, electricity in a particular city is super expensive, as it happened to me when I went back to my country. And I can imagine that many poor people in shantytowns are receiving very low quality service to survive. What do you do with housing? What type of housing, people live in? So you see a lot of shanty towns now in Latin America, and not little shanty towns. For example, Ciudad Bolívar in Bogota, which is a ring around Bogota, is more than 3 million people. This is not a little city. It's larger than many cities around the world and many capital cities in Africa. So what do you do with 3 million people who are transient, are in the drug business, in the violence business, are in the margin of society? So this is another very important space of debate of sustainable development in Latin America. What to do. But I have a positive view, an optimistic view of Latin America, because we still have very, very good, solid resources on the subsoils and on biodiversity that we can actually use coherently, wisely, for the benefit of our communities as well as for the benefit of the world. Latin Americans are aware of the role that our biodiversity plays in the world. We are not unaware of the role of the Brazilian Amazon, but we need to also have a careful view of what can be internationalized. If we are thinking about the internalization of the Amazon, we should also think about the ozone layer, global warming, petroleum, and many other resources. It's not just only the Brazilians that need to internationalize the Amazon, but there is the Congo Basin in Africa and so on. There are many rivers that should be internationalized. They are international in the first place. Just look at Europe and the challenges of Europe in terms of pollution and so on. The Mediterranean maybe should be internationalized. Maybe all the oil in the world should be internationalized. So this is a very hot political issue, but I want to let the audience know that Latin Americans, we are aware of the importance of our continent for the rest. Traditionally, human rights have been thought about as legal instruments, as obligations that are on a paper, on a constitution, on a contract, and so on. Over time, I have studied quite a bit the behavior of private sector, the behavior of government in relation to human rights, and I have realized that human rights are also economic instruments, like prices, subsidies, taxes, and so on. Rights are very much central to an incentive structure for private sector development, for government action, for NGO participation, and so on and so forth. For example, the right to information is central to NGO communities. So rights are central to the growth and enhancement of civil society. So many people have asked the question, why human rights have anything to do with the private sector? Why should the private sector be subject to human rights or rights in general? My answer is very simple. There is nothing the private sector does that is not linked to rights. Can you imagine the private sector saying, Alfredo, I sold you this apple, but I didn't pay them. So what is the recourse that the private sector has? A legal structure that will enable them to sue me and get the money for that apple. How do you patent a new technology? Otherwise you will hide it. You will never bring about this mouse for the computer as a Hewlett-Packard if you were not living as a private sector within a legal structure of rights and responsibilities. But what I find in the world is that there is more use and abuse of rights than assuming responsibilities in the private sector. And this is not a punt on the private sector. It's simply a reality where people are more concerned about profits and making the bottom line, the single bottom line, rather than the triple bottom lines, which will be profits, social, and environmental. I think the future of the world, the future of sustainability, depends on the private sector. I don't think it depends on an authority by the government sector, although we need the government sector, obviously. So the private sector has to be part and parcel of the creation, the management, and the self-realization of rights. It's to their own good that this happens. It's not just something that they should see as punishment or right as restrictive. And the private sector has always participated in the formulation of rights. I've been in the Commission of Human Rights for 8 years. Many, many people from the private sector have participated in development, even on economic, social, and cultural rights, like the right of housing, the right of water, the right to education, and so on. The next important point is that human rights should be seen as capital, should be seen as endowment. Rights are endowment. If I know my rights, if I have rights, then it's an endowment. For example, if I have the right to information, and I've been informed actually, I have more an edge over you that you are not informed of a particular issue or a particular technology or a particular, discovery. And that's why there are patents, because people want to protect, the flow of information. So rights are, in a sense, capital. So think about two corporations, one that knows very well its rights, and the other one that doesn't know these rights. And then they want to think both of the same issue. Shall we invest in Chile or not? The company that knows its rights for repatriation of profits, the rights of worker, what are the labor codes, all this rainbow of rights, and the other, they will invest in a particular way. They will allocate resources in a particular way. If they see a country that has a legal structure, an institutional structure of rights, and these rights are respected and justice exists, most probably they will all go to that country. But the company that doesn't know that that country has this structure of justice and rights probably will be very shy in terms of how to allocate resources. So rights do influence material allocation of resources in the private sector and in the public sector. It's not just a matter of the public sector. So a company that is not willing to bring the issue of rights in its own daily operation is just losing time, losing profit, losing everything. There are many small-scale industries that do not know what their rights are over public resources, for example. So sometimes they say, oh, how come you get this money? I didn't get any subsidy. Well, you don't know what your rights are. I didn't apply for these funds because I had no idea that my company applies for those funds. Yes, they have the right to apply for those funds, for those subsidies, for diminishing taxes and so on and so forth, over the land, over technology transfer. Think about the imitators in the world, which is the large majority of small-scale industries. Can you import this technology from India or from China? What are the rules of the game in terms of using these technologies? So rights should not be seen just as a political instrument in the running of business and in the running of commerce and in the running of trade. It's an essential ingredient that actually establishes the right capacity for that company to be sustained over time. So I would bring the issue of human rights to the chambers of commerce of the world. I will bring, the issue of human rights into social corporate responsibility debate. I will bring the issue of human rights on the equatorial principles for banking. I will bring issue of human rights in every training course on human resource development or capacity building in that enterprise. If the workers, this is not just about the rights of the workers or union, this is about the workers knowing what is the incentive structure around which they are acting, And the same thing the corporation. Money moves where human rights are respected. La mundial ha estado presente en relación a un hecho que pasó en mi país, que es de los mineros, los 33 mineros que quedaron dentro de la mina por muchos días. Mucha gente pensó que los mineros no durarían más de una semana o 2 semanas. Sin embargo, duraron muchos días hasta que en forma muy exitosa fueron sacados de la tierra. La tierra los tenía protegidos y atrapados en cierta forma, y nosotros con la tecnología, con el esfuerzo nacional, con el compromiso político y con la sabiduría de nuestro pueblo, logramos que realmente salieran ellos de esta situación. Éxito, lo reconozco, es importante haber visto a mi país movilizarse frente a este tema, un tema muy difícil y muy espinudo, porque no era fácil sacar a los mineros de la mina. En cualquier momento la mina podría colapsar y se acabaron los mineros. Sin embargo, este suceso, esto que pasó en nuestro país, debería ser la llave para abrir la puerta a una discusión nacional e internacional sobre el Estado y sobre la capacidad de crear formas de trabajo que realmente no tengan que sufrir este tipo de consecuencias. O sea, lo que tenemos que discutir es cómo ha sido posible que esto suceda en nuestro país y cuál es la posibilidad de que este fenómeno, no solo en el sector minero, sino en otros sectores, esté sucediendo todos los días. Gente infectada por los gases de la industria, gente que es afectada por las condiciones precarias de trabajo de las personas, de las mujeres en particular. Industrias que, por definición, tienen sujeto a los trabajadores a pesticidas y a una cantidad de agroquímicos, que significa enfermedades, deformación de sus hijos, mutación genética, etcétera, etcétera. Yo creo que es un momento preciso para discutir cuál es el rol de la industria del sector privado. Si es solamente ganancias o si es también el desarrollo de nuestro capital humano, si es también el respeto a nuestro medio ambiente natural, etcétera, etcétera. Y creo que no hay que tratar de sacarle, digamos, el cuerpo a esta discusión, porque estamos en el año 2010 y en el año 2010 existen los mecanismos, las condiciones, las tecnologías para tener un nivel de seguridad, un nivel de trabajo decente para que la industria no solo produzca ganancias, sino que también aumente el bienestar de una nación. A mí me parece que a pesar de los años que ha estado la Organización Mundial del Trabajo, que es nuestra hermana más madura dentro del sistema de Naciones Unidas, históricamente, que todavía estemos en sociedades en que están dispuestas a sacrificar el tema de la seguridad por un nivel de ganancia mayor. Y este es un tema que tiene connotaciones económicas porque la seguridad necesita recursos, tiene una connotación de ganancias porque va a disminuir el nivel de ganancias, pero más importante que eso, tiene una connotación humana en una sociedad que está dispuesta a sacrificar un grupo para que otro grupo pueda ganar estas ganancias, y tiene una connotación ética o moral que se basa en la pregunta hasta qué punto un ser humano tiene que estar condicionado a este tipo de trabajo para poder sobrevivir en una sociedad que tiene tanto dinero, porque nuestra sociedad chilena no es una sociedad pobre, pero hay una gran pobreza, que es el tema. Nosotros tenemos el coeficiente de Gini casi peor de toda Latinoamérica. Por lo tanto, el crecimiento a nivel material, el sistema de libre comercio, la globalización, no es una garantía que vamos a tener mayor bienestar en nuestra sociedad, de que va a haber menos pobreza. Pero en este caso, no ha sido una garantía de que dándole chipe libre a la empresa privada vamos a llegar al trabajo decente. Por otra parte, creo que no es la conclusión mayor restricción, mayores derechos, mayores indicaciones normativas, porque lo normativo solo da resultado en un ambiente de conciencia social mucho mayor. La normatividad es un estado del ser. Que yo sea normativamente decente con usted y no le pegue un puñete en la cara, es un problema de mi conciencia. No es que existe una ley y por lo tanto si existe la ley yo voy a hacer tal y tal y tal. La sociedad tiene que aumentar su nivel de conciencia respecto al trabajo decente, a las garantías que tienen los que trabajan para nosotros. No hay fruta en el supermercado si no hay trabajadores que colectan la fruta. No hay ropa en las tiendas si no hay trabajadores que las produzcan. Por lo tanto, del punto de vista de interés propio, por decirlo así, que no es mi motivación, pero por último, por interés propio, a tener este tipo de mundo en que yo quiero satisfacer mis necesidades, necesitamos reconocer el poder social, el poder humano, el poder espiritual de los trabajadores del mundo. Sin este reconocimiento, sin esta conciencia que reconoce, que le da espacio, que contiene, es un contenedor del trabajo, va a ser muy difícil que el problema de la seguridad que se violó en Chile sea repuesta y sustentable solo a través de legislación, derechos y reivindicaciones. Tenemos que entrar en el desarrollo de nuestra conciencia social. Y solo un mayor nivel de conciencia traerá una nueva sociedad.